in Fort Portal as he headed in that direction. And we were commending the police so far for being lenient and convenient with the National Unity Platform as it traverses the country. Today he's meant to be making route to Kasese district or the Kasese region. But we want to first join him and have an interaction with him. What are the backbone streamlining intentions for the National Unity Platform in the middle of a season when they will be heading to the elections in a few weeks, if we can call it that, 2026. What's the purpose of the nationwide tour? What are the expectations and what do they hope to come out of with it? So we do have Ggoobi who's talking.
Morning at NTV.
We're glad you're still with us, and for those that have been following the Kickstarter discussion, there we had the president of the National Unity Platform, Robert Kyagulanyi Ssentamu, aka Bobi Wine, speaking to our very own Ggoobi in Fort Portal, where he's due to depart to Kasese as part of what the National Unity Platform says is the latest campaign that aims at, as they put it, awakening the population across the country ahead of 2026. The details of that particular campaign for the day will be coming through in our subsequent bulletins, NTV at 1, as well as NTV Akaongezi and NTV Tonight. For now, let's return to the studio for a business update discussion where we're looking at the 2023 economic growth prospects for Uganda in light of trade headwinds and the latest trends in the world of commerce. I have with me renowned economist Francis Muhire and Collins Tugumisiriza, who will be helping us understand where we should be looking and what we ought to do in order to be able to move forward towards the goals of economic transformation as espoused by President Yoweri Museveni. I say President Yoweri Museveni because in the latest twist of events, he has suggested that there is a need to ban the importation of second-hand clothes into the country. This is a controversial topic and it has many players within the small and medium enterprise sector speaking and talking in tongues. Whether the economists will also be speaking in tongues remains to be seen. Welcome to the program, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Economic prospects for growth in the country right now. The permanent secretary in the Ministry of Finance, who is also the secretary to the Treasury, Ramadan Ggoobi, highlighted at the second economic forum just a few days ago that Uganda has arrested inflation. But across the globe, inflationary pressures continue to challenge economic policy makers. We saw just the other day a meeting of the most powerful bankers in the world, Jackson Hole, as they wanted to listen to the chairman of the Federal Reserve Bank, that is Jerome Powell, on whether there would be a hike in rates and the nature of hike itself would be felt across the globe as it would inform policy directions in other countries. We haven't been able to follow through on that particular development, but there is a bit of nervousness that some of the economic models that are being applied need to change in order to attend to the challenges of the day. Let me begin with Francis Muhire on whether economic models are still working or it is now a case of try and error.
Good question. Thank you, Chris, and good morning, dear viewers. That's a very interesting, line you've put, making a quote.
That's right.
That we've arrested inflation. Statistically, that is true because we saw inflation peaking at 10.7. That was in 2022, and we've now, seen coming to as low as 4.9%.
That's right.
So that is headline inflation. Technically, you see that. Yes, we are now into a single digit and below 5%. But we need to ask ourselves, why is it that, for example, inflation has gone down? Of course, there are obvious reasons, but also there are key factors that have come into the equation of this inflation to go down, which should actually worry everyone. And the number one factor is actually reduction in domestic demand. There is no demand from the domestic or from within the economy.
That's right.
So the question is, why is it that, the demand has gone down? It's not because that people have money and they don't want to demand, because remember, demand is about the desire and ability. So the population has desire, but they do not have
that
ability.
Aggregate demand aspect is not coming through.
And you know, when you talk of inflation, it's not about that prices have reduced. It's just an indicator that the increase, the rate at which, let's say, prices have been increasing has stabilized.
Okay.
So you can have prices increasing, reach a point and stop there. They are high up there, but now they have stopped there or stabilized. And that's where we are. So it shouldn't be, you know, a triumph, you know, factor that, you know, we have arrested inflation. Instead, should be worrying why is it that the domestic demand has reduced. And I want to tell you that when you go ahead to look at, for example, the statistics by UBOS, the data on quote-unquote average economic growth has gone to negative 6.5%. When you have domestic demand reducing to that level, definitely you're going to find that there is a negative impact on economic growth on average. So when you look at the quote-unquote average economic growth has reduced to negative 6.5%, that is both in the second and the third quarter of last year. That shows you that of this financial, that shows you that there is a problem. So there is nothing to jubilate about, you know, this, you know, inflation being, you know, reduced at 4.9%. And also the other thing we need to ask ourselves is that while we talk about, let's say, headline inflation, how are we doing in terms of, you know, utilities? You know, you want to look at, for example, water. You know, the price of water per unit has been increased from around 3,500 to 4,114. You know, without any justification. I don't know if you've been observant enough to check your water bills. Trust me.
Increasing in.
Yes, and remember, you're talking about utility like water, which is hard to compromise on its use. For electricity, you can compromise, but water is a different case. So that's why, statistically and politically, I want to put politically in a capital letters. Statistically and politically, you're going to see that yes, inflation has reduced as low as 4.9%, but in reality, people out there are struggling. Yeah.
Okay, that's a very interesting overview. Collins Tugumisiriza, when you hear the Permanent Secretary, Ramadan Ggoobi, speak of with a lot of optimism, then it offers a bit of confidence for those that could be looking more on the gloomy side of things. We must agree that he has been instrumental in stabilizing the economy ever since he came on board, despite the challenges at one time that had him facing criticism, to go back to the lecture theatre as an economist that he is. Looking at how he has handled things or marshaled matters at the Ministry of Finance and the Treasury, would you agree that our prospects are indeed very good going into 2024?
You know, a lot about economics and the market is perception. Perception is more important than the facts.
Wow.
So whatever the facts might be, if I give you interpret those facts into a positive thing, then I can send ripples of optimism, and then you find people behaving based on that perception they have picked.
Injection of energy.
And maybe they will now spend more, or they will invest more, or they will borrow more, whatever it is. For leadership, the more you create optimism, the better. But there's a question you asked also before about whether economic models are still relevant. And I think it's very important to think about it. The question right now, we're in a delicate point. You see BRICS is coming up. You see our banking system in the US and Europe are collapsing. You see people are saying the dollar should go. Just African leaders, President Ruto of Kenya, Zambia are saying we should now get off the dollar for exchanging in between us. So it's all these suggestions could either create optimism or fear Like, we don't know what's going to happen. Will it work out? Will it not work out? But it's already a sense, there's a feeling that the system no longer works and cannot be trusted anymore. Right. And so there is a sense that we want to create a new system. In fact, you know, like President Ruto said at the Paris conference, that they want to redesign the financial architecture. So if you hear such statements very strongly, and they are courageously saying it at this time, it tells you that of course, there's also the issue in West Africa where France is being pushed out. These ripples are saying something, that the system, and the message is the system, the economics we are using no longer works. We need something new. So what is that new thing looking like? Exactly. Is the question. What should it look like? Yes. Of course, the quest you can feel is people are questing for more sovereignty, more control over their fate. Nations, individuals are saying we want to be able to control, be it our resources, we want to be able to control the currency shifts, value, the inflation. We want to have more control because, you know, international, when something happens globally, it affects local and may affect you, even if you have very good plans. What happens somewhere else could change your dynamics. Okay. But as that is happening, there is another big question I want to also bring up, the issue of generational mistrust and you may say Cold War. You notice that whereas in Africa, of course, the biggest population is youth, but the leadership are way above 70, and their model of thinking economics, thinking politics, comes from when they started.
And there's a huge chasm between the leaders and the population.
So, and yet, when they started, were in their 30s and 40s. Now, those who are in their 30s now and 40s have been on social media. This is like their life, their world. They've engaged. They're always thinking something new and the like, new possibilities.
That's right.
So that Cold War is there, and is not being recognized. Is not even being addressed effectively, and the mistrust is what I may say is an issue of succession, a succession problem. The older are saying, I still don't see someone who is like what I used to be when I was 30. I don't see the energy, I don't see the ideas, the ones I used to have.
Okay.
Now the young are also saying, but I don't like you, I don't want to become like you. So I want to become like something else. Maybe a movie I watch, there's a movie star, I want to become like that one. Or I want to become like Bill Gates, or I want to do something else altogether. So that mismatch is crisscrossing, and that's a succession issue. Because you see the person who has the power, or who has runs the business, or he's a lawyer and he's in his 70s and he has all these employees, apprentices, he needs to, you know, elevate one. But he's not, because he doesn't feel like they are like him. They want to continue the business. So that kind of crisis also needs to be addressed at the earliest.
That's an interesting one. I don't know whether that applies to social, I don't know how to describe it. There's a bit of...
It's a labor issue.
It's a labor issue,
yeah, like that's right. You can look at it from, you know, skills, manpower.
A socio-economic mismatch in terms of values and aspirations. And that could also be a bigger problem than I can contain on the show today. So I'll love to leave that there and concentrate a little bit more on the prospects that we have to be looking at, especially in light of where we're going. You spoke about the young people and those that may not be as old as those that are running the policy making, and that's a question that brings me to, or rather an issue that brings me to the question. The president recently, and this is for you, Francis Muhire, touched a very controversial sector that employs many of the youth that Collins Tugumisiriza might well readily be alluding to. The sale of clothes. And these are second-hand clothes, the ones that have been used by other people in other parts of the world and then repackaged and brought to the country for consumption here and use. The president was very categorical. He wants to be able to bolster the local economy in order for us to be able to export. He's a president who is dealing with the challenges that others within the region are also dealing with, especially Kenya and Tanzania. But it's widely being described as a slide into protectionism. And protectionism at this point in time, some people say is not the best strategy to follow. I don't know what you make of the president's inclination, or whether it is something that should be given attention, or it was a political and a speech issue.
You know, these days, when you see President Museveni's moves, you wonder, he comes up with moves which are, even ask yourself, was it even necessary for him to come out and say, this is how we are going to do it? Because when you stand up and say publicly that actually we are going to practice protectionism as you've said it, for example, ban importation of second-hand clothes, and when you're aware, or maybe you've forgotten that you're a member a country, let's say with World Trade Organization, you committed yourself, you signed on these agreements. You don't just stand up and say we've banned this, not because maybe there is like a justification, if it was like health, you give a good justification, but where you're saying that you want to boost, you know, your manufacturing sector, let's say the textile industry. It really bothers me. I don't understand why, with his experience, you know, he can make such a move. Because you see, when you're trying to boost, you know, your economy, let's say the textile industry, you don't just wake up and say, let us ban importation of, let's say, second-hand clothes coming in. You just boost your textile industry, you support it. We've been talking about import substitution.
That's right.
Support it and make sure that the products coming from this textile industry are competitive, or they can compete with other textile products coming from outside the country. And this takes me to, for example, the trade agreement Uganda made with South Africa. I was in South Africa at the beginning of this month, and I was trying to observe what was in their textile, you know, market. In South Africa, you're going to see that you have much of the textile products coming from China, other countries, but you also have local.
That's right.
Local textile, you know, products, which actually highly compete with these products. And the last time I checked, I think 2021, when you look at the trade between Uganda and South Africa, you're going to find an imbalance. South Africa is exporting about goods worth 122 million US dollars, while Uganda, we are exporting 18 million US dollars to South Africa. So, talking about, you know, learning from other economies on the continent, it's not about, you know, practicing protectionism. Because when you come up and say something like that, then other countries are going to say, okay, even us, we are going to stop you from exporting your coffee. Maybe we can now go for Ethiopian coffee. So these moves are not necessary. You just have to do it smartly, smoothly, and make sure that boost your textile industry, and those products should compete or outcompete you know, products coming from other origins. But also, the president should be reminded that that industry is talking about, it might look to be informal. You know, the second-hand clothing quality subsector. Right. But I want to tell you that that subsector employs a significant number of youth in this country. So banning that kind of you know, subsector will definitely put so many youth out of employment to join the other big, you know, a portion of youth who are already unemployed.
All right, that of course also highlights unemployment and inflation connection. But I think at the end of the day, that's a discussion that has been taken on by the stakeholders across board. Collins, a country like Uganda finds itself in, I want the right word for that, an intersection. We have three options, so to speak. If you are on a road and then you find this intersection and there are options and you want to take, but somehow you believe you need to take two and not necessarily one, and yet you cannot divide yourself. And that calls for a whole new sense of direction. I do not know what kind of advice you would be offering the technocrats. I know they are doing a pretty good job, but sometimes consultation, especially from people who might have a different view, is always a good idea.
I think in terms of direction, indeed, we are at a crossroad and a delicate moment. You see what the World Bank's move was, and the statement they made concerning our not continuing to lend us was a message more than the action itself.
More than the action itself.
And the message was also to others, other financial institutions, investors, that, you know, be careful about Uganda, and you know, to the extent that they could start punishing other people who support Uganda. But remember when the anti-homosexuality bill was done, there was a threat that they are going to economically try to punish Uganda. So I think when Uganda is at a crossroad, what it should be thinking about is self-reliance strategies. Self-reliance. In a sense, rather than, you see, because on the whole, if our economic system generally depends on outsiders, not on our fate, we cannot determine our fate, it means we need to start thinking critically about how do we take back certain things into local hands. And when I say into local hands, it does not mean that only a select few in power to run things, but how do you get more Ugandans involved in controlling certain things internally. The financial sector is very key in this kind of shifts that are going on. Yeah. And because we have mineral wealth in gold, this can help us leverage on to build an independent level around our financial sector. Then for agriculture, it becomes also very important, our commodities in food that we have. You'll be surprised how much we import. We still import quite a lot,
a lot of
food,
stuff,
or even food, I mean, in spite of one. But to be able to change the balance that we are in, if in the event of any further assaults, because the foreign entities want to infringe on sovereignty decisions and things like that, you have a position. So the fight, where we are on what the crossroad is about, is really about resigning our sovereignty versus being in charge. And the moment you don't have control over this, then you have to find a way. Perhaps I may also try to suggest, think about, this is also a time to innovate a lot about economics and finance and business. Or you could say models, enterprise models.
Yeah.
Most of the things we are applying here, we are copying what others have done. But you see where they were. Like, for instance, in the late 70s, China was of course communist and was starving, was isolated because of their policies. Yeah. And they had to find a way to attract investors or financiers or people to build industry. Now the president is talking about value addition. So to attract them, you give a certain package, and then you also have an internal, what do you call it, strategy, that when this is here, we need to find a way in which there is some kind of succession, that when you put your factory here, it will end up having more Ugandans replicating the same thing, or even
that has been very controversial to the extent that local investors or those that work within the investment circles do not believe that the locals have a fair advantage when the foreign investors are given just about every advantage there is. I think that one is also a mismatch.
Yes, it is, but there are packages, there are ways. For instance, if someone is coming in, you make sure you match them, and you get a local with this one. So it's very clear what value that person who is bringing adds, and the local is an executor. Okay. So it's
all right, we are entering the final bend. Francis Muhire, you will do your wrap, but as you do your wrap, I would love you to help us navigate around the post-pandemic economy and how it ought to work. Many of the goings-on are to attend to the disruptions that were caused, to the extent that many people still give the excuse that, hey, we are still dealing with what COVID left us in. I think that should be something we should be able to transition quickly and then begin to work in a post-pandemic economy.
That's a good one. I want to say that just as we've said, we are at the crossroad. The pandemic is actually still on, but as I already said, the pandemic is just a small fraction of what is really going on in the world. You know, you've heard about, you know, notations like the Great Reset, and I want to tell you that the pandemic is just part of the whole change that is going on. When you look at the world today, you see a lot is changing. That is if you pause and see if there is a lot going on. When you look at, for example, the global financial system, the whole architecture is changing. That's why I talked of, you know, of BRICS. Yeah. We've had a global financial system that has been in place since 1944, and instead, we from the emerging economies and the global south, we realize that this is not working for us, and this is actually one of the angle the BRICS is trying actually to lure, you know, economies from, you know, the global south, that we've had a system which has actually not helped us. It's high time that we change
one that is actually deliberately designed for us not to operate well within it.
Yes, but also have to be, you know, aware and also aware of, you know, how external exploitation can be. So this brings me to the economic models. Do they still work? You see, for an economic model, no matter how good it is, it depends on the environment this model is going to be applied. You know, as we apply economic models in this country, we have to be aware of what is happening on the global stage. And that's why, for example, the PSST is doing a commendable job, and a few Ugandans in the government are trying to do their best. But because of the environment, because of the system, which goes beyond, you know, the borders. Yeah, so, and he brought in an aspect of old people, you know, overshadowing the young people. He is right. Until the young people say enough is enough, forget about the handouts, and we take charge of our interests as countries, especially on this planet, I mean our continent, then we will continue to be in this same position.
All right. Collins Tugumisiriza, I would pray you use 60 broadcasting seconds.
Okay, 1 minute, yes. I think for our economic opportunities, growth prospects, whenever you go to a workplace or even business sector, the thing, when people see someone succeeding, they ask you a few questions, either how do you do it, or they'll ask you where did you go to school, or they'll ask you what do you mean, Osabirawa or Osamirawa, whichever way. Now the point about this kind of thing is that what we need is to find new ways. If we're going to find new ways, we are at a stage where the information age is ending, and there's a golden age coming up, which means there's a lot about spirituality at work. And the culture, we need a new culture of honor. When we have a culture of honor that we respect, especially say the gift of prophets, because it's in a prophet where, you know, prophets help us to prosper. When we listen to the direction they are giving, we'll be able to find the new direction of which is the best way out of the quagmire we are in.
All right, 2023 economic growth prospects. Depending on where you are seated, there is a very high chance that you may be looking at a lot that is coming up. What I deduct from my guest's submission is that the youth ought to reconstruct the narrative by accepting that there's a lot of power that they hold in order to be able to change the situation. That does not mean to be violent, because anybody out there might misunderstand the power that the youth hold. The power is to change the narrative in business and be able to begin to work towards transformation. That will do it for the business update. I hope I've not been misunderstood. Conclusion of Youth Month commemoration, we shall be taking note of that. My colleague Priscilla Regina Naloga shall be at hand.